Hello everybody, and thank you for coming to my talk. Firstly, I would like to thank the Bullseye Glass Company, especially Sam and the production team, and of course to the gallery and both Dan and Lani. I'd like to acknowledge the Stephen Proctor Fellowship and the Australian National University in the making of this exhibition, and I'd like to thank Mel Douglas for all the moral support and her excellent coal-working skills. I would also really like to thank immensely my husband Jeremy Lapisto, who helped me in so many ways, and I really could have not done this exhibition without him. As you're about to see from my work, there is a common thread of time, location, and creation. Right now, I'm back in a location that fostered much creation. However, I feel this time is hazy as memories are built to fade. Hopefully by the end, you'll be able to get a sense of my obvious and occasionally overcast thought process, and I will also introduce you to this new current body of work. So here is a short history of both my creations and my locations. I began my foray into glassmaking at the Australian National University, and I studied under the late Stephen Proctor. I approached glass not to make pieces, but rather to create ideas about what I knew and what I felt was special to me. These are the first pieces I ever made in glass. Half of my ancestors are Greek, and to honour them, I made a series of family portraits, a tiny monument for each person. I love food, which is a must for any Greek girl, and I made dedicated vessels to hold different delicacies. These are olive and feta dishes. To combine my heritage and my new community, I made food in the kilns of the workshop and served my ancestors' recipes in handmade vessels to my new glass family. And, as it is in Greek tradition, we celebrated the event by smashing the vessels. Then, in 1997, there was an Ozglass conference that Dan and Lani came to be a part of. I entered 4 fused stringer dishes into the student exhibition, and these innocent meze dishes, which is Greek for little bites, would change the course of my life. Unfortunately, I don't have a slide of the images, so I've done a reenactment. I was one of 4 Australians invited for a residency at the Bullseye Glass Factory to experiment using their materials in the making of our individual work. This residency allowed me to explore the connections between my feelings of family through 2 things that I love, the medium of glass and the topic of food. My schooling focused on the idea, so therefore I was required to stay versatile in my ways of making and skill level with various glass processes. I returned location again, back to Canberra, to finish my degree. At the end of my degree, I moved away from my location, home and family for what I thought had been a temporary trip to the United States. I had won a travelling grant, and I had written to Lani with what I like to remember as an offer she couldn't refuse. I worked for Bullseye for free for a year in the R&E department, back in the good old days when the department was at the back of the furnaces, where Sam could easily check up on us, and the annealing point was 960. In return, I got both a working visa and a husband. This is Jeremy as the cute batch boy back in the late 90s. I continued to work for Bullseye for another 3 years on amazing works and for many incredible artists. It has always been the case that I have paralleled making my own work with helping others too. This is an important part of my life as I often get challenged by this relationship between being a technician for people, because it can make you think outside the box and test the boundaries of what is possible in glass. And on to another new location for creation. Jeremy and I eventually started our own studio, which we ran for many years. We used this studio not only to create our own work, but also continued to make work with other artists. We were fortunate to grow our business in a community that included artists who used our services and other fabricators who helped us make certain every facet of each project was done the best it could be. From small, formal exhibition artwork to large front facades of buildings. Of course, all these moves and life changes affected my ideas and concepts, as my initial 12-month visit to the States turned into 12 years. Instead of making objects exploring the connection between food and family, my works looked to deliver a different connection that could cross an ocean. I started to make work about the pain of homesickness. On the left, pins pierce in the shape of the Southern Cross through the sheet of sky above me. And on the right, a remnant melds the contours of the Australian Capital Territory and the state of Oregon. A needle pinpoints the conflicting physical positions and emotional locations of home. My focus developed into a search for a common thread, to hold two perceived opposites together. And most of the pieces you've seen up to this point are very small in scale, small enough to sit in the palm of your hand. And I like to make intimate work, and I like to physically bring the viewer up close. I made glass pieces that referred to the stitching of remnants in an effort to represent the act of binding the idea of place together with the idea of home. Inside these quilts, drawings of something I may see in the States is sewn together with a memory of my home. These may not be the most successful pieces, but now I have some distance, I can see that these were bridging pieces that set my work into a new course. The stitching fell away as I made ties to my new home in Portland. However, I kept the remnants so that I could construct monuments to past moments. I returned home to Canberra for my first exhibition since leaving Australia, and I wanted to deliver an exhibition that viewers could identify with, so people would know they had not forgotten where I'd come from. I made these monuments into postcards, depicting the hue of home and places visited in my past. Each postcard provided the shape and shade of a remembered place and served as a reminder to one day return. The shape and shade of these postcard reminders then collected into days, and these days collected into weeks, and these were bundled into months and together became the spectrum of my years. This piece is from my calendar series, and the absent squares depict members of my family's birthdays which I had missed by living overseas. This is called Absent Days, and these note all of the phone calls from home, plus a little visit in April. These spectrums related to the events of my emotions. It colour-coded the way I would remember a collection of days, from the intensity of my interactions to the tone of my travels. This is one of my most favourite pieces I've ever made, and it depicts my travels throughout the year. To symbolise the concept of capturing a moment, I started to use the Polaroid format with swatches of colour to represent places. This is my Canberra landscape and my US landscape, and by using colour, I tried to capture the feeling of a place. I like to work in the abstract narrative, patches of colour used to illustrate. This is driving on the right and the left sides of the road. A baseball versus a cricket ball. Still searching for a common place. Constellation counterpoints of the northern and southern hemispheres. My travels then developed into their ode shaded snapshots. These snapshots allowed me to collect the coloured components of a moment, distill the details of a scene, and capture the aesthetic atmosphere of a place. In 2009, Jeremy and I decided to move to Australia, or rather I decided and he came. I had successfully applied for a role at Canberra Glassworks, and Jeremy would pursue a PhD in sculpture, back to the location of my original creation. So before I left Portland to move back to my old hometown, I created a series of Polaroids that depicted the things I would miss dearly about my new hometown. Looking out of the window on a frosty day. Storm clouds rolling in. Raindrops outlining the landscape. Misty mountains in the distance. Markers of moments. These are the seasonal shakes from a local fast food chain, each flavour depicting the start of a new season. All of these small components coming together to mark the passing of time. Alone, these pieces illustrate only a fraction of an idea. But together, the collection can speak to the enormity of a moment. These are 100 Polaroids that depict the 100 cherry trees that line the west bank of the Willamette River. Once I was based back in Australia, I had the opportunity to apply for the Stephen Proctor Fellowship. This is an opportunity that allows an Australian to receive both some funding for research, travel, and a corresponding residency at the ANU Glass Workshop. I thought for months about what this opportunity could be. I laboured over how to describe my thoughts on paper and how to locate the essence of what it was I wanted to do. My proposal ended up being to travel to both Istanbul and Venice to visit the great mosaics. Back in 1997, I'd travelled to New York to see a favourite painting of mine. Up to that time, I'd only seen this artwork represented in books. This physical experience of the painting made it almost unfamiliar to me. There was texture, tiny people I'd never seen painted in the corner, and a vibrancy that bounced off the wall. Essentially, it was an entirely different painting than the paper one I had stared at for years. It was a real experience, and it made my heart race, and still to this day makes my eyes well. I was and still am a student of Stephen Proctor, and so I've been taught the importance of travelling to experience other cultures and to see the works of the world in their natural setting. The Proctor Fellowship enabled me to add new pieces and places to my memory. I had a chance to see the world's most remarkable creations in their true locations. Mosaic naturally encompasses notions of the past. It has a rich history of being utilised to illustrate a culture's beliefs and stories on the surfaces of some of the world's most important architecture. The tiny pieces of smalty spoke to being markers of moments as they gradually assembled to create a complete image, like the seconds of our lives melding into days and then into years. They served, and still do, to tell us stories and the moments of a person's life, cemented together for the ages. The ability to assemble a seamlessly natural arrangement with these very tiny square rigid bits, yet still retaining softness, I just love them. I'm in awe of the amazingly intricate and graceful patterns created from these small broken fragments, and they are as vivid today as the day they were set by unknown hands. And as I kept seeing these amazing things, it was the impact of the colour that I could not escape and the great joy I experienced at looking at these timeless works. The colour was incredible. And these hopeful skyscapes with the hand of God reaching down, these were almost in every mosaic I saw and fast became my favourite parts. Every field of mosaic colour holds many separate shades of small squares, and these small squares become lines, the lines became fields, and the fields become shades and shapes. And so I returned to do the residency portion, in which I had a 4-week period to explore the ideas and areas that interested me. I love that the mosaics are such an early form of communicating stories and are loaded with rich history. I loved the handmade quality. I wanted with my pieces to try to capture the ephemeral beauty of my inspiration. Starting from the departure point of mosaic, I wanted to make personal and updated memorials to the passing of my time in a place. So I started to look at the ways wind currents and clouds can symbolise the temporary and ever-changing nature of moments in time. I love the symbolism that these types of skyscapes can offer, the misty recollections and the daydreaming. I explored new ways of working in terms of scale and number, and I wanted the exhibition to be dependent on the sum of its parts. I wanted to give a nod to my history and acknowledge the town that became my second home. And all these thoughts and ideas became the exhibition that you see here. Transoms reference the open space above doorways and architecture. They bring clouds within view and into space. Small panels play out the circulating change of a 10-day forecast. The series of window views look to bring into square the drifting focus from staring off into the distance, looking out of windows into the faraway sky, daydreaming and wondering of past moments as the moments pass. These misted window views acknowledge the place I once called home. The view of each is obscured by the fog that has developed over the details of each remembered place. These works are a mosaic of a year's worth of coloured days. Each day is framed in the form of an old-fashioned photographic slide. The collected year begins with the time of my travel in April 2011. Each slide represents one day, lines up into weeks, collects into months, and becomes 1 year. In this detail, the top week found me in Australia, and the next I had a couple of days in Venice and 1 day in Murano. Even in the colouring of a more normal month, regular working days undulating in their separate tones and became peppered with bright spots of gardening and days with Jeremy. And of course, there is the month where my ideas began condensing into form. And as I kept working, thinking of the locations I had been and the ideas I was creating, the memories of my travels started to fade and have now become hazy.